Howie Roseman pulls a rabbit out of a hat, keeping Darius Slay in Philadelphia. That's not all. They got greedy at the cornerback position, and Gardner Minshew is no longer to the backup of Jalen Hurts. What happens in the quarterback room in 2023? All that and more in today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Like a good book that you can't put down, that's what the Eagles' free agency has been. Reality television at an all-time high when the NFL kicks off their free agent period. And there's only one place where you can follow along with all the news each and every day. It is your first listen here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available. I'm your host, as always, Gino Camilleri, leading you through this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel and brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And man, oh man, if you could have put odds on what the Eagles' percentage was that they could have kept Darius Slay and James Bradberry coming off of a week where it seemed that they might lose both of them. Darius Slay's name is brought up in trade discussions. James Bradberry seems to be the belle of the ball at the cornerback position. Teams everywhere need cornerbacks. The money that is going to the cornerback position isn't going down. It's just going up. They see the money that wide receivers are getting, and they want some of that action because they are shutting down those top guys. You see guys like Jalen Ramsey continue to get traded because guys want and teams need that type of player. Somebody that could take away a top passing threat, somebody that can play in multiple schemes, somebody that could play at an all-pro level. Well, you have two of those guys, and you had a chance to lose both, but now they are both returning to Philadelphia. It is official today. Darius Slay signs his extension as reported first by Ian Rappaport and by many sources, actually. This Darius Slay thing went on forever, so shout out to whoever put information into this thing. It was like following a soap opera where you had to be tuned in every single step of the way. When it was all said and done, Darius Slay adds 2 additional years onto his contract, which would have kept him here through 2023. He is now here through 2025. The total over the next 3 years will be $42 million, and he's getting 23 fully guaranteed over the next 3 seasons. If you break it down to APY, what the average per year is for these guys, James Bradberry, Darius Slay, you're getting Darius Slay for a total. Think of this. You are putting $16 million a year into this guy for the next 3 years. That number is under the 17.2 that you were going to pay him this year. And not only that, you're paying James Bradberry $12.6 million per year, which seems even less because these guys are good. And actually, I did that math wrong. Darius Slay is making $14 million a year. So take $2 million off of that. Collectively, these guys are averaging around $13 million per year. James Bradberry is coming off of an all-pro season. Darius Slay is an all-pro caliber cornerback. And I didn't love the idea of him walking or them getting next to nothing for him because you were either going to have to swallow this unbelievably large dead cap hit, or you're going to have to kick the can down the road and move that dead cap into 2024 when you want to have this fresh slate. Darius Slay didn't want to leave Philadelphia. Players didn't want Darius Slay to leave Philadelphia. Darius Slay's wife made it evident that she was not pleased that they were going to have to leave Philadelphia. Howie Roseman seems that he made the wrong decision and brought him back, much like he did with Fletcher Cox last year. The thing I am getting from free agency is that guys are buying into what's happening in that building in Philly. You hear Fletcher Cox report yesterday that he takes a team-friendly deal. He wants to stick around in Philadelphia. James Bradbury said, and he said before free agency, that he would give Philly any chance to match what other teams are offering. Well, Philly didn't match that. They actually gave him less than what other teams were offering, but James Bradbury bought into what the Eagles are doing. And it has to stem from what is going on at the quarterback position, and that's having Jalen Hurts, who right now is the best guy at the position, on top of having the best offensive line in the sport. You have the best quarterback in the NFC, arguably the best duo of wide receivers in the NFC, arguably the best tight end in the NFC, a defense that just got back one of the best all-time interior defensive linemen the team has ever had. They've drafted two guys very high in Milton Williams and Jordan Davis who are only going to get better. You keep Darius Slay, James Bradbury, and Avonte Maddox, a trio that combined to be your best passing defense in nearly 2 decades. And if you could keep Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the wizardry that Howie Roseman would be able to pull off in this free agent window is truly unprecedented. And you have to appreciate what he's doing, because he's valuing the positions which should be valued, and he's letting those positions that the Eagles really don't value go out and get the money that they deserve. And even the positions that they do value, rather, interior defensive line. They weren't going to pay Javon Hargrave $21 million and pay $11 million more than what Fletcher Cox is getting. No, they weren't going to give Darius Slay $20 million a year, which I don't know what he thought his market was going to be. But heck, anybody that is playing at that level should demand as much money as they want. And the Eagles aren't going to go above what they thought that player deserved and what they thought they could afford. Well, in comes this X factor of having this team that just came off of a Super Bowl, still wants to buy in and is willing to take money off of their deal. That's so unprecedented in today's sporting world, not just in football, but every single sport. Guys are out there to want to go and get the most money, and I applaud them. And that's why when he got released, I was about to say, go get your money, Darius Slay. You have to go and get your money in the NFL. It's not a long time that you're in this league, so you have to go and get as much money from these rich owners as possible. But Howie Roseman can't make those mistakes and be nostalgic. Well, he was nostalgic for all the right reasons, because you're keeping the players that have performed well, the guys that are still on pace to go and have nearly an all-pro season in James Bradbury and Darius Slay. Those are the type of guys that you need to continue to re-sign, not the Alshon Jeffreys that were clear that they were aging and they were eventually going to find their way out of Philadelphia. What is going on in the secondary right now, to me, is perfect, because you still have the optionality that if you want to draft one of those guys high, that you can. And now it doesn't pigeonhole you to where we thought 2 days ago you were going to be forced to take a cornerback there. Not that they necessarily would have done that, but now you add a corner in Darius Slay by not releasing him. You keep James Bradbury. You have that trio. And they made another move that we'll talk about in segment 2 that adds more depth to this position. But ultimately, Howie Roseman is winning free agency by keeping the guys in-house and the right guys in-house. And I want to end this segment by saying, folks, I have a master's degree in accounting that is sitting behind me for anybody on YouTube. And that math that I did there on Darius Slay's contract is exactly why I am an accountant who can't count. I need a calculator at all times. I did that math wrong, and I even put out a tweet with that. $14 million per year to Darius Slay, $12.6 to James Bradbury. They're keeping their two top guys for nearly $25 million. They'll both be out of a contract within the next 3 years. They had to get younger. They had to replenish, and I think they're going to find ways to continue to do that through the draft. And they took a chance on a guy in free agency that they signed just before I hopped on to record this episode. So coming up, we will talk about what the Eagles did at cornerback outside of Darius Slay and James Bradbury and what it means for the position. But before I get to that, I have a message from our friends over at the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Eagles podcast. March Madness is going on right now. I have my 3 TVs in my living room going, and I have my phone next to me where I've downloaded the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I put in my first bet when I registered, and I got a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. It's midway point through the NBA season as well as March Madness. Put in your MVP bets for Joel Embiid, put in your Sixers futures, and bet on all of the games that are going on for NCAA March Madness, and do it responsibly. You can get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon or downloading the FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Go get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 at FanDuel.com/lockedon or download the FanDuel Sportsbook. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Thursday edition of the show. We will have one more tomorrow on Friday. Lou is a little under the weather, sending him good energy. I'm your host, Gino Camilleri, over here at LOE. Thank you for joining us and making us your first listen at the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. So we're talking about the cornerback position. We're talking about keeping two All-Pros. Darius Slay, James Bradberry, respectively, will be in a contract for the next 3 years each. You have those two. They'll probably age out together, but you're going to have to find some options outside of those two to get younger, to add more depth. The Eagles haven't done that since they added Zech McPherson in the draft in the 4th round just 2 years ago. It seems that Zech has a place on this team. He's turned into one of the better gunners in the entire sport. He's turned into one of the best special teamers on the Philadelphia Eagles. And when he has gone in there in limited minutes, he has done okay over the past season. He had some rough spots in his rookie year, but he was a 4th-round pick out of Texas Tech. He was raw. He had the length. He had the athleticism. The Eagles knew that they were going to have to come in and refine some of his technical abilities. And now you're sitting there and saying, what happens in 3 years? Well, we don't have to worry about that till 3 years down the road, but you want to be proactive. And what the Eagles could do is take a chance on a young cornerback who is coming off of his first deal or was released prior to his first deal, who is a former 2nd-round pick, somebody that Gino Camilleri had tweeted about way back when. The Eagles had another cornerback in former Browns 2nd-round pick, Greedy Williams, just minutes before I recorded this episode, well into the evening Eastern time-wise. What does this mean? They add Darius Slay back, they add James Bradberry back, and they sign Greedy Williams. Why? Why did they add another cornerback when they just got 2 of them? Well, you need to have depth at that position. I want to take a little trip down memory lane to a 2018 game in the Superdome, the Mercedes-Benz Superdome at the time against the New Orleans Saints. Your top cornerbacks go down. Avonte Maddox goes down. And you're left in there with guys like Devontae Bowsby and a guy with the last name Hawkins, where I can't even remember his first name. I know he's in the XFL right now. But you were in that position because you hadn't drafted good cornerbacks for depth in a while. The guys that you drafted in that draft between Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas didn't work out for you. So you're in this position where all of these guys go down, and you have next to nothing. Actually, it was 2019. It was that complete blowout that they suffered in 2019. What that moment was probably a kick in the rear end to Howie Roseman to say, we need to go out and get depth. We need to draft guys at this position. Well, they really haven't done that, and I thought it would be a turnaround, but instead they go out and trade for Darius Slay, and they were able to sign James Bradberry off of the Giants. They did draft Avonte Maddox, and you have guys like Zech McPherson that are 4th-round picks, but you haven't invested highly. Well, Greedy was a 2nd-round pick. The Browns have just continued to upgrade and continue to add there. They have Greg Newsome and Denzel Ward, who are 2 top corners. Those guys are premier corners in this league. It's a shutdown duo. Greedy Williams was the odd man out. Am I saying that he's going to come in here and could potentially be a future starter? No, I'm not saying that. But am I saying that's impossible? I'm not saying that either. I believe taking risks on young athletes at the cornerback position is never a bad thing. Because at worst, Greedy Williams comes into camp, you find out he can't play, then you cut him. You get out from underneath it. Zech McPherson's still cornerback number 4, you go out, you draft somebody who will be your 5th corner, you add somebody late in free agency. What this does, though, is that the upside is you could have potentially lucked into a guy who could be a spot starter, somebody who just found their way out because there were other corners that were better than him, which it happens. And the Eagles find a guy who's young, 25 years old, who has 20 plus starts, has played in nearly 40 games in the National Football League, at a position where every team is continuing to have to find depth. It isn't a signing that's going to blow you out of the water. It's not a signing that should be looked at without any eyebrows, because I look at this position, and I need 5 guys. I need 5 guys that you could trust at any time in the National Football League that could play at least zone coverage and can tackle on an island and are 6 foot at least and can play the boundary. Because the Eagles saw what happens when you have undersized boundary corners, guys that can't tackle on an island, guys that don't have long speed and aren't athletes, Bradley Fletcher, Kerry Williams, for example. And you saw the upside of what happens when you bring in guys with length, guys who are athletes, guys who can play in multiple different systems. Greedy has started in this league. Why not bring in a guy who has some minutes, who could be an upside home run type of swing if one of these guys does go down, and now you're adding more competition between him and Zach McPherson. I like this signing. I like Greedy Williams. I like cornerback depth. I like height. I like athleticism at that position. I keep saying that. The Eagles have to have guys that can run, and Greedy, at worst, is going to be a guy that can run outside. So we'll see how it goes. It's just a depth signing. Nothing to look too much into. I don't think it ultimately will keep the Eagles from adding another cornerback in the draft, and I certainly don't think that if one of those guys is the highest on their board at 10, Christian Gonzalez, Joey Porter Jr., Devin Witherspoon, that they wouldn't take that position just because they have guys like Greedy Williams, Zach McPherson, 2 guys in Slay and Bradbury on that contract, because they have to continue to add and develop at that position, because you're trying to find guys in free agency now, because only one of those guys that you drafted is in that room, and that's Zach McPherson. The rest of the guys were added in other ways. You have to add to that position. Greedy Williams, an underrated signing. We'll see how it goes in the end. Ultimately, it could be one that we look back and say, hey, that played well, got 3 or 4 starts out of him, and in a spot, big minute late in the season, maybe he comes up for you. That's something that you look for in these types of signings, these underrated ones, which Rashad Penny was one of them. And one of these underrated signings that I didn't think would cost as little as it did happened to be at the quarterback position. Gardner Minshew, no longer a Philadelphia Eagle, signs with the Indianapolis Colts, reuniting with Shane Steichan. We'll get into that to finish up this Thursday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us here on this Thursday edition of the show, Locked On Eagles podcast. 5 episodes a week. This is the Thursday edition. We have another episode tomorrow. Thank you for making it your first listen each and every day over at the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a review, rate, subscribe, do the whole 9. Interact with us on Twitter as well. But for right now, we are finishing up this edition of the show. A move happened at quarterback today. A quarterback left Philadelphia. And he reunited with somebody that just left Philadelphia as well. That is Super Bowl coach, losing Super Bowl coach, unfortunately, but put up the most points as an offensive coordinator in a losing outing in the Super Bowl. Shane Steichan gets a head coaching job over at Indianapolis. The Indianapolis Colts just released Matt Ryan, the only real quarterback option they had going into next season outside of Sam Ehlinger, who's on the roster. But they had a hole there. And for $3.5 million, they were able to bring in a familiar face to Shane Steichan's offense in Gardner Minshew. And good for Gardner. He's going to have a chance to start. Did I think he could go for more money than that? Absolutely. Lou had made mention a couple times on the show that he thought he would end up in Arizona and start while Kyler Murray was trying to recoup from that injury. Well, right idea, wrong coach. Indianapolis provides a real opportunity for him to start. yes, if they do draft Anthony Richardson, if they do draft Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, whatever their Baskin Robin flavor quarterback is, he's going to need time. I like Anthony Richardson. He's a unicorn. I'd say draft unicorns all the time. We've never seen an athlete like this at the position that has an arm like this. You might think, could he be Jamarcus Russell? Absolutely. But could he be the next upside quarterback that people scoffed at, like I did with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen? Absolutely, he could be. But for right now, you need an option that can go out there and has played minutes in the National Football League in an offense that has Jonathan Taylor, has an offensive line that is pretty solid, has a couple weapons there. You just need somebody that's going to run Shane Steichan's offense, and who knows it better than the guy that was behind Jalen Hurts and that had multiple games over multiple seasons schemed up for him, that being Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew and Shane Steichen, I'm sure, have a great relationship, and I'm sure that played into the reason why he went to Indy. For only $3.5 million, though, did I think the Eagles would match that? I did, for sure. So what is next? What do you do? It's Jalen Hurts and Ian Book. It's not going to be that going into day one next year. Free agent quarterbacks are going off the board relatively quickly. But let's go through the list and see who we have remaining. I think there's a couple guys that fit the mold of what they need. I think they need somebody that is going to fill in for Jalen Hurts in terms of an athleticism standpoint, that he isn't going to be a statuesque type of player that Gardner Minshew was. So if you're just looking at the options, Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, Mason Rudolph, Blaine Gabbert. If you like some of these older guys, do you want to bring in Matt Ryan? I don't. Do you want to bring in Joe Flacco? I don't again. It's slim pickings. I think ultimately they end up with a guy like Marcus Mariota. I think Marcus is at the point where he realizes that teams aren't looking at him as a starting option. He most likely is going to have to go in as a backup now, especially if they released him from Atlanta, where you don't even know if Desmond Ridder is going to be the guy. I think it's clear and evident what the route forward is for Marcus Mariota. In terms of drafting one, though, I think that is a big, big possibility. Day 3 pick, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Malik Cunningham, potentially so. But you can't go into this season, much like we had talked about at corner and safety, and it's going to be the thing at linebacker with 2 brand new players, a rookie there, and a first-year player at linebacker. And quarterback, are you going to go into next year with Ian Book, an unproven guy, and a potential rookie as your number 2? I don't think so. The Eagles don't operate like that. And that's why the $3.5 million for Gardner Minshew is intriguing, but he has the upside on the deal, which could get up to $5.5 million based on incentives from playing time, which are all going to be available to him to go and grab. Because I believe he's a better quarterback than Sam Ehlinger. I believe that Shane Steichan believes that he can play in his offense at least for a season to hold them by until the Indianapolis Colts try and find another quarterback option. But we'll see. The Eagles have to do a lot of things at that position. They aren't going to go into the season as barren as they are at quarterback. Currently, they're probably going to add one of those veterans. We'll see who it is. Just hold on to your horses, because every day in free agency just keeps getting better and better for the Philadelphia Eagles. A lot on the docket today. Darius Slay signs his extension. The Eagles add Greedy Williams as a depth corner signing. Gardner Minshew is no longer the backup to Jalen Hurts. Man, it feels like every day we're getting 4 to 5 different pieces of information that we could talk about here at the Locked On Eagles podcast. But that's the great thing about it, is that we get to do it 5 days a week. It's like opening a newspaper, but you get to do it in video form over at YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure you tune in to the Locked On Eagles podcast through the Locked On Podcast Network and make us your first listen each and every day. But for your second listen, you have to go check out the next best show coming through your airwaves. It is Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft to salary cap management and more, Join NFL experts, and I'm telling you guys, you know they're experts. You know who they are. Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday, just like we do here at LOE. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for where we finish up the week. Something is going to happen. Howie Roseman always has us on his toes. Check us out on Twitter. You can find me at GC24_football. Follow the co-host at DiBiase LOE. He's a little bit under the weather. Hope he gets better. Follow the mothership at Locked On Birds. Check out all the Locked On Podcast Network shows. Tune in tomorrow, and I'll leave you with this. I'm Gino Camilleri. Fly, Eagles, fly.